In the couple of months before we met Srila Prabhupada, when Gary and I were living in Haight-Ashbury area, there were some flyers that were distributed. And they said things like, the Swami is coming to town. Chant and be high forever, this sort of thing. I'm sure you've heard of them. And I remember Gary looking at one of these flyers that said, the Swami is coming to town, and him saying, well, when this Swami comes to town, we'll go see him and we'll do whatever he says to do. It's just, the whole thing was such a mystical, incredible experience, in that we were actually very well situated at miles away, 1,500 miles away in Texas, and we were drawn there. And I think this is true of many other people. So then we went to Frederick Street and found out about when the classes were and so forth. Made an appointment with Srila Prabhupada and Mukunda Das, who later became Mukunda Goswami, arranged for us to visit Srila Prabhupada. So in our first meeting with him, private meeting with him, he took us up to his apartment. I remember waiting pensively to meet Srila Prabhupada. He brought us in, and Srila Prabhupada was sitting in, those little bay windows that they have in San Francisco, these apartments with bay windows. He was sitting in a sunlight, looking very effulgent and very peaceful. And he sat in a chair, and there was another chair opposite. I think he sat in the lounge chair, and I sat in the rocking chair, or vice versa. I can't remember that one point, but we were opposite one another. And Gary, sat on the floor. And he began to ask us questions, all about our lives, what we were doing, who we were, where we had come from. He was very personally interested in us. And I mean, he was very personally interested in each of his disciples, each of his students. But he asked us, if we were students, what we were studying. We told him we had been studying art and that we were artists. He asked about our parents, our family, so many things. In the course of the conversation, I told him that I had studied art in Europe and that I had traveled all over Europe and studied in various places. And he was quite surprised. He raised his eyes and said, "Oh, you have traveled so much?" Because I was very young. I looked like I was 16. I was actually 19 or 20. And I said, "Yes, Srila Prabhupada. Yes." He wasn't called Prabhupada yet. "Yes, but none of it has made me happy." And he smiled and said, that is required. To actually be disgusted with material life. At the time of the initiation, there were no saris, there were no social customs, none of these things. And I had been an art student, and art students wear jeans. So I was actually initiated in blue jeans. Well, actually, they were beige jeans with paint stains on them. It didn't seem to matter to Srila Prabhupada, but that was what our life was like at that time. When I tell people I was initiated in jeans, they're just amazed. But most of us, we didn't know what saris were yet. So during my initiation, I remember watching the ceremony and seeing him putting the flower, putting the colored dyes, and putting the, making the fire, building the fire. And I remember thinking, what is this? What is the depth of the meaning of this? What is really going on? In other words, I didn't have the kind of, I didn't have the background. I mean, there was no Bhagavad Gita printed yet, for one thing. The only thing we had were Prabhupada's 3 books. So we did read those right away. And the first job that he gave us was painting a great big 4-foot by 4-foot Radha Krishna painting. But during my initiation, I had some misgivings. So then after the initiation, I went to see Srila Prabhupada, and I went upstairs to visit him. And I told him that I didn't feel liberated. I thought that when I got initiation, by golly, it was going to be nirvana immediately. I was going to be liberated. And he was very patient with me. He said, yes, just see the fan over here. There was a fan sitting in the corner. If I unplug it, it may spin a few more times, but because it has been unplugged, it will stop eventually. So it's like that. Your material life, although it may not cease immediately, because it has been unplugged, it will spin a few more times. But just do the process as I told you. So he explained it very beautifully, very, very gently. Srila Prabhupada immediately engaged us as artists. He knew that we were art students before, so his very first project was to have me paint a great big 4-foot by 4-foot painting of Radha Krishna from the cover of his Srimad Bhagavatam. Then he had me paint a great big 4-foot by 3-foot painting of him sitting on the Vyasasana with a painting of Lord Chaitanya dancing in Sankirtan party hanging behind him in the picture that I painted, and specifically with Lord Chaitanya's foot touching his head. So those are the paintings that he started us on. And what I found so significant in this is that Srila Prabhupada engaged people in the work for which they had a natural propensity. He always found, and this gave the person a taste for devotional service because they already had that inclination. Another very significant thing happened in Boston. Swamiji became Srila Prabhupada. The way this happened was that Gorsinder was studying Hindi, and he was studying Sanskrit, and he was studying various forms of address, and Ji is an affectionate friendship form of address, and this is all very new to us. So I was sitting in Srila Prabhupada's room and taking dictation, as I often did, and Gorsinder was at the doorway, and he said, Swamiji, is it okay if I call Govinda Dasi Govindaji? And Swamiji said, no, Ji is a very third-class form of address. It should not. And so I said, well, then why are we calling you Swamiji if it's a third-class form of address? And he said, not very important. I said, no, it is very important. We want to know what is the best thing we can call you. And Swamiji said, well, you could call me Gurudev or Guru Maharaj or Srila Prabhupada. And I said, well, which one is the best of those three? If you give me three, I don't know which one. So you pick the best one that you want to be called. And Swamiji said, Srila Prabhupada is nice. I said, okay, from today you will be called Srila Prabhupada. And so I told all the devotees, and everyone started calling him Srila Prabhupada from that day. He was no longer Swamiji.